I'm very impressed with Tim's works. I especially like the bigger one. Very skilled way of placing the paper on top of each other. Probably one of the better works of this kind that I've seen. And I love the very pale tones, very elegant palette, very elegant tones that he uses. Very good. Very
Yeah,
good.
it's a real tones.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about, in terms of your practice, we all, of course, have seen your sculpture in the other room. So I was wondering if you could sort of speak to the way that you're going from 2D, and I did enjoy so much hearing the way that you layer the collaging process that's sort of into painting and layering paint. So if you could maybe speak to going from the 2D approach to the 3D and how that's...
Tim, could I add to the question? Would you speak about the symbolism of the chandelier? Speak about the chandelier in terms of the 2D,
Yeah.
and not 2D.
Well, the idea of, I mean, yes, I came from I was an architect for a while. And what people don't realize is that I wasn't really making architecture for architecture's sake. I was interested in sculpture and creative form making, not traditional means of, creating postamental boxes. There was much more to be expressed there. But I also did that because I didn't want to do sculpture in the way sculpture was really being made just from an artistic standpoint. So that's why I did that. So with a little bit of background to the answer is that I wanted to get off the flat surface, and I wanted to question how collage, which traditionally thought about flat surfaces, or Howard, like you were talking about surrealist movements, and they're very small. It's like, if I was going to do collage, I wanted to question how people thought about collage in one instance. So the other instance was that how can I make collage three-dimensional? There's many ways to do it, but I thought about, well, yeah, rather than just layering space or filling space with stuff, it's like, how do I make an object that's a sculptural object that I designed, I created, but is still a collage process? That's still rendered in that same way, and so I just wanted to do it. I'd never made sculpture before.
It's so interesting too because it's so curvilinear and sort of voluptuous, and the collages are very linear. They're much more.
Yeah, well, I think
there's more rectilinear.
because I don't want anything to be so directly connected with the other. I knew that I didn't want this to be out there. I didn't want to make a four-sided box that had, what's the point? So I wanted to then do that moment of creating that object in a completely different way. And it was, I created that in three-dimensional space, both mentally and physically. And this is all created in a two-dimensional space, although it has a lot of depth. But they're two different things. For the same way I didn't want to do sculpture or do architecture or do art and have them all really be the same thing, but just in a different discipline. I really wanted to take that moment to really question and challenge that unique thing I was about to step into and do something, push myself to do something different with it. And that's why I did it. The collage, and I'll get to Pat's part of point B of this question that Siri started, was that the collage was drawn. It was created from a drawing. I spent a lot of time going to chandelier stores, which is like being a kid in a candy store. You are on ecstasy with it. You can't leave. I mean, I've spent hours in there, and I'm blown away. It's just gives me goosebumps. And that feeling that I have when I walk into now, I wanted that wow and awe moment for people when they saw that I made this big ass paper bling thing out of paper. And it's paper. And I didn't know how to do that. So I looked at a lot of chandeliers, and I had to figure out what that language was, what makes a chandelier a chandelier. And there's really two kinds, and I'm not going to go into all the detail because Mike will have a moment, because now I'm talking about chandeliers, and I'm talking about paper. But the idea was I had to figure out how to do it. And I didn't want to make someone else's chandelier out of paper. It defeats the purpose again. I wanted my expression of what I thought was a chandelier. And literally, when I was working on this was the first time that I realized I was doing my artwork, sculpture, and architecture, but mainly architecture from the from creating models. And I had this really giddy moment, and I still have it when I see that. It was a wonderful moment for me personally, but the chandelier was created from a drawing, and it was a drawing in 3 dimensions that I did. And I think Howard came over and maybe 1 or 2 other people to the studio. All I had was this tube. It was nothing, and I think I remember explaining this is going to be a chandelier. It's like you can't do that. And I had to start with one moment, and it was making the long arms on the chandelier, and it's a design, and I wanted it to be a beautiful design, and I wanted it to be sensual. I wanted it to be just have that moment, and I started with that, and then I had to test that, question that, literally go through explorations, did that. Then I simply just held it up there, and I sat with my sketchbook, and I drew in the air, what's the next thing that all kind of makes this thing work together and be graceful, even though it's a different part. And literally, I went that every step of the way, and every piece is a reaction to the pieces before it, and also to the experience of making this be interesting in 3 dimensions. You had to imagine it, you had to draw it, you had to draw it on paper, and you had to do the mock-up, and then you had to walk around it. And believe me, I made some of those things, literally what I thought was right, 6 times, put it up there and go, and they got thrown away, and then the next one. So it was a process of drawing in 3 dimensions, in essence. And then to Pax, I know this is a long answer, but I have long answers to everything. Is that in working on these works and over time, I started to notice that chandeliers appeared, and it wasn't a calculated thing. It was just like there was 1, there was 2, there was 3. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I had to think of this idea of why is that there? What is it about chandeliers? How does the chandelier actually relate to these pieces? And it was at that moment, and I didn't then go out and create the next 6. There's 12 of these large white ones, so everyone knows. Is that to put a chandelier in each one of it? That just there was no purpose in that. But to find the logic or reasoning of the significance or the symbolism in that chandelier to me was then the moment like, okay, this works. It works in the pieces. It works the same way even if they're not in those pieces. Why not make that moment, to be the moment for the show, to make that the thing I created for a 3-dimensional object. So it wasn't pre-calculated. That was the last thing that was done, the last thing that was finished. And it was, I thought it was a great moment. It was a great spectacle. And I love spectacles for shows. I like this opportunity when work is seen one way and thought of as one way, to have this other moment where I wanted something for people not to forget. And some of you've been to my other shows, I've always had a very spectacular moment with some piece of work, and if it's not about the work, if you don't like the show, I know you're going to remember something that was in that show, and it's probably going to be that thing, even if you don't like it, because it's like, I don't know, for me personally, humbly, it's kind of spectacular.
I'm going to conclude. Others of you want to talk to Tim, can do it one-on-one. I think spectacle is actually a good final thought to look at here. These paintings all have a deep visual presence in this room. As they talk in relation to one another, there's this marvelous sense of cadence and poise and rhythms. These things sort of march around the room and create a chord-like effect. Within, there is something to spectate at by us spectators. I think that when we look at Tm Gratkowski's art, we're seeing a kind of echo of the human thought process itself. We don't think linearly and in full-blown outlines and statements. We think incrementally, we decide, we redecide, we make associations. Our minds are constantly a whiteout condition of all kinds of signals that we're sending back and forth internally. And I think that this is a part of what lends its authenticity and deep moving power to these works. Would you all please join me in thanking Tim?